Hey, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and in this video, we're going to jump back into building a responsive WordPress website in 2021 using Oxygen. Now, last time we did a lot of prep work and not too much actual building, so we set up our global styles, our heading styles, our body text styles, our global colors, things like that. We kind of laid the groundwork, and we were able to build out this hero section with an overlaid header. And as you can see, everything's nice and responsive. We have a mobile menu here that works just perfectly. But today we're going to be digging into the meat of building out this home page, because as we scroll down, we don't have anything below the hero. And now we'll start to see really the fruits of our labor in setting up all that groundwork. And we'll see how easy it is to make sure everything is nice and responsive for mobile devices. So let's jump into Oxygen and get started. So this video is a little unique because we're not really following any pre-made designs. I'm kind of just throwing stuff out on the page, and we're going to make adjustments until it looks good. But that being said, there are some really common patterns that we can kind of follow as we build this out. Now we have our big hero with some text and the overlay. And now that I'm looking at this, I do want to make an adjustment here below this heading. I do think that there's a bit too much space below it. So let's change the bottom large to bottom medium. And that's just our margin bottom class here. And that looks a little bit better. I just didn't like the amount of space between the logo and the heading being less than between the heading and the text. That does look better. And now all we need to do is build the rest of the page. All right, so let's scroll down and go ahead and just add another section. I do think we can probably get rid of all this stuff now. We know what the website needs to look like. So let's just delete these other sections to get them out of our way. This is stuff where we prepared and loaded images in and grabbed colors and things like that. So let's add a section, but let's see if we can pull this off. I do want a shape divider here, but the problem is I have an image up here. So will it look decent or not? Probably not, but maybe we can make it work. What we'll need to do is have our image go to a solid color right along the bottom. Now we already have a gradient on that image or on that section. I think what we can do is we can add another div, absolutely position it here on the section, and then give it a bottom gradient. So let's try that. This is going to be an experiment. I don't know if it'll work, but let's give it a shot. So since we know we're going to absolutely position something inside this div, inside this section rather, let's go to advanced layout and set this to position relative. And then let's add a div. And I kind of doubt we're going to do this again, so I'm not going to add a class to it. If I end up being wrong, we can always come back and convert it to a class. So let's go to advanced layout and set it to position absolute. And we're going to give it a top up 0, right 0, bottom 0, and left 0. That's going to make it the full size of the section. Now we're going to want to adjust the Z index of everything else probably. But first let's play with this. Let's go to advanced background gradient. And let's add a couple colors, and let's set the bottom one to our dark gray here, which is just gonna cover everything, and then the top one to transparent. Now that gives us our bottom gradient that we want, but we don't want it to kick in quite in the middle. We want it to actually kick in way lower. So let's change this stop point to percentage and set it to 100%, which puts it way down at the bottom. Let's try 140, and then let's go ahead and just change this div's background color to this dark gray to make sure that it smooths that transition. And I think that will work. So now we need to change our heading Z index to something like, I don't know, 10. And then let's change the text Z index to 10 as well. Under layout, Z index 10. And that'll put it over top of that element. And now let's change our div's Z index, advanced layout, the one with the gradient here, to 1. And that'll put it underneath. Now, the problem you're going to have sometimes is in the builder, whatever you hover over gets a higher Z index. So you might run into issues where you try to, click your heading element and it doesn't work. Well, there is a way to fix that. We can actually just completely hide this element in the builder, which will make our preview a little less true to life. So you can toggle it on and off using this little eye icon in the right hand side. But it does get it out of our way. So we'll just hide it for now. And now we can go down and do our shape divider magic. So we actually want this background color to be white. And I'm going to change this heading text. So CFE typo white. So let's go in and change that to actually white, because I don't really like that off white when we're using actual white up here at the top. Let's check our text. That's using the same class, so we don't have to adjust it there as well. Lock that class back and go to text block. Okay, now let's add our shape divider below here. So add shape divider. We're going to position it along the top. And I'm not really sure what kind of divider I want yet. I think maybe a wavy or a curvy one, because we want kind of a warm vibe here. So let's set it to curvy 1 and set the height to 120 pixels. That looks pretty cool. I think it kind of has a good visual flow. So let's do that. And then let's, of course, set the color to this dark gray here. And then we can toggle on our gradient there to see that that's going to be a smooth transition, I think. Let's go over here and see. It's not quite perfect, but it actually doesn't look too bad to me. But we did, we softened that image quite a bit by adding that other gradient, and then we softened this transition down here quite a bit. So I think that looks all right. So let's go back over here. Now we're done working on this section for now. Now we're on this shape divider section. So let's do some basic like cards. Let's do a basic card layout here, because card layout's pretty common, and we can use it to show something like the unique attributes of our coffee. So the way I'm going to do this is actually use CSS Grid. So let's set the section to a grid layout. Let's set it to 3 columns, and then we can tweak all this stuff in a minute, but I do know I want my gaps to be 16 pixels. So let's change all that. And then let's start dropping in divs. Now I'm going to go ahead and give these a class from the outset of card, because we'll probably reuse cards elsewhere throughout the site. So let's set the background color to white. And let's give them a border radius of 4 pixels. And let's give them a border bottom. We're going to try this, see if it looks good, of I don't know, 2 pixels, solid, and we're going to give them maybe this brown color here. It might look a little cheesy. We'll see. So we'll go to advanced size and spacing and set the padding to something like 16 pixels all the way around. And then let's add some H2 elements. Now they may be a bit too big. We might end up just using text. But for now, let's call this 1, and we'll just adjust this text later. Let's add a text element. Some 1p. Well, some 1p. There we go. It helps if you don't typo it. And I'm just using text expander to pop that lipsum in there when I type a certain keyword. And let's get rid of some of this text. We just want a little blurb here. Okay, get rid of that. And then we'll add a button. Now we can use just a button element, which is fine. And I think for this case, it'll work for us. Let's set the button color to our dark brown. And then we want to change the text to something like learn more. And then make sure our text color is white. And then hover color, we can actually use maybe this like lighter brown here to get a little bit of a hover effect. Now we're going to add some bottom small spacing there, and bottom medium there. Okay, so these are our cards. Let's go ahead and create 2 more. So we're going to duplicate. And you can see that our grid layout is doing its work, but we do need to make one small adjustment. I believe our shape divider is impacting our grid layout. It is. So we'll undo the deletion of that. So what we can do to fix that is we can actually just wrap all these cards in their own div. So then the div is going to be responsible for the grid layout, and then the section will just be a basic flexbox layout. I think that'll work a little bit better. So let's set this to 3 columns, change our gap to 16 again, and then we'll want to go back to advanced size and spacing and make sure this thing is 100% width. And then we can drop our divs into there. Or our cards, I should say. Okay, so there's our basic cards. I'm not sure if I love the way they look yet, but we'll make some adjustments as we go. I do think they could use, oh, I know what we can do. We can actually change the background color here on this section to our off-white. Yeah, which will give us a little bit of pop there. And then let's go out to Brum, shadows.brum.af, and get some fancy shadows for these cards. And for anything else we need shadows on, because we're going to add the CSS from Brum to a class. So this card class, I'm going to go ahead and go to advanced and lock it for now. We may make adjustments later. And then we're going to add a shadow class. And then that's going to go to custom CSS and paste in that box shadow code. And then we're going to lock the selector. Now we're going to add shadow to each of our cards. We have to spell that correctly. We can actually just start typing SH and it's going to show up. Now let's save that and take a look on the front end. That looks a ton better. Our cards do pop. Now what we have here, which is interesting, is we have a little bit of overlap in the corner of this card. We want our cards on top of our shape divider, which we can totally do. All we have to do is select our shape divider, make sure its z-index is something like 1, and then our card that we want to have overlaying the top of it, let's make sure its z-index is higher than that. So let's set it to 10 like we did up above. And now you're going to have a nice overlay effect there. So that's our little card section. And we can reuse this type of a layout throughout the site. Anywhere we want cards, we can have cards. I think I probably will adjust the headings to be a smaller size though. So let's go ahead and do that. I think I still want them to be H2s, but I think I want to reduce the size. So we can either do that on the ID, or we could add a typography class that changes the size of the heading. I think in this case, I'm just going to use a class because that's usually the best idea so that you can reuse it later. But we don't want to break the responsiveness of these headings. We still want them to scale. So let's go to Manage, Settings, Global Styles, Headings, and let's grab the H2 clamp code. And then let's add a class, and we'll call it like CFE-typo H2 smaller. And then let's change the font size to a none unit, and let's paste in our clamp value here. It's a little easier to see here in the properties pane, so we can kind of tweak it. I think we want to go down to whatever the H3 size was. So actually we can just be way smarter than I just was, and we can go to settings and just copy the clamp from the H3. That'll work way better. So let's copy that over. So then on elements with this typo H2 small class, they'll actually be the size of an H3, which is fine. We care mostly about the hierarchy in terms of the markup. Now you do want the visual hierarchy to be pretty consistent, but we probably won't use H3s on this page. Maybe we will. Maybe we'll make adjustments later if we end up doing that. But for now, this will work. So this is going to be H2 smaller, H2 smaller. And this gives us a smaller text size while still preserving our responsiveness, okay? So now what we want to think about here, of course, this whole video is about building a responsive website. Let's give ourselves some more cards. Let's look at the behavior of this grid on the front end when we start scaling. So we're going to go down, down, down. It doesn't work. It breaks. It just doesn't scale properly, right? So what we want to do is change our grid to be responsive, which is incredibly easy to do. But first, I noticed that we need the overlap on all these elements. So let's go to our card element and just change the layout z-index to 10 on all these. That'll make all of them overlap our shape divider in case as this viewport size changes, a different card ends up overlapping. That'll just save us a ton of work. So we'll lock the selector styles again. And then we need to select the div that is controlling our grid layout. And all we need to do is select auto fit columns, and then we need to adjust our minimum width until we get the layout that we want. So 260. And now let's take a look on the front end at what happens. So we have our 3 card layout at desktop widths, and then we scroll down, and what's going to happen, it is going to eventually just pop down to a 2 card per row layout, which looks great. And then as we continue going down, it pops down to a 1 card per row layout. So just with a couple clicks, we now have a responsive grid. And this works in most cases, though some grids will require a bit more finessing if you have really custom special layouts. So I think these buttons look absolutely terrible. So let's go into these buttons, and here's where we made a mistake, right? I always like to call out mistakes made during videos because they're learning opportunities. These buttons don't have a class, which means if I make an adjustment to one of them, I'm gonna have to make that adjustment to all of them. Luckily, it's easy to fix. Let's delete all these cards except for one. And the final one here. And let's select the button, and let's add the class card. Yeah, I didn't prefix that, did I? Anyways, CFE-card, and then __ button, so that we know this is a button that belongs on a card. Let's add that, and now let's copy all the styles from the ID to the class, and then let's clear the styles on the ID. Now it has a class, and it should work just like we want it to. Now let's check. We need to adjust our text color on hover because it really is not playing nice. And then we need to, let's just make sure this is white. And then we need to make sure that our text size is reasonable. So let's go down to something like 22 pixels. Nope, that's too big. Let's go down to 14, and then let's adjust the font weight a little bit. There we go. That looks a little less obnoxious. And then button size 8, and then I actually kind of like the outline button, so let's do an outline button on this one. Yeah, that looks much better with our design here. So now we can select our card and duplicate it as many times as we want. And now our button has a class. So if we decide we don't like the outline and we want solid, we can adjust one and it will adjust all of them. So there we go. We now have a responsive grid of cards. Let's just change this to 2, 3. I don't know exactly what content would go here, but I'd imagine maybe some interesting points about the company or the product or something like that. And maybe there wouldn't be 6, maybe there would only be 3. Either way, our grid is going to adapt to however many items there are. So that's our card grid, which is really, really super handy. We might want to use this again later. So what we can do is we can save this whole div as a reusable part. So let's just click the little pencil icon and click make reusable. Now we're going to do something a little tricky here. So we'll call this card grid, but we don't want this actual instance of it to be reusable. So what we got to do is delete it and then add it from the reusable library, which we'll actually have to save and refresh to see it there. So let's refresh, and we'll go down to our section here and go add reusable. Now we want to add this as editable, so it'll actually basically just copy those elements into our design. Now you would want to use single if this was going to be the same everywhere, because then you just go in and edit the reusable template and it changes it everywhere you've used it. But in this case, we're just using the reusable feature as a way to kind of copy this into different designs when we need it. And then we can, edit it and change it as needed for each one. Now let's just do a couple more sections for this home page. So we're going to do a couple of like 2-column layouts. So let's add a section, and then let's add a columns element, and we'll set it to 50/50. So now we'll go down here and do some things here. So let's set the background color on this one to maybe our primary brown color. That might look kind of nice. Now what we're going to want is probably another shape divider. Maybe. You don't want to go overboard with shape dividers. Too many is not good. So let's do the whole less is more approach for now, and later we'll see if we want to add one. But for now, we're going to set the background image of this left-hand div to one of our coffee images. So let's just use this one. It's pretty cool. And then over here, we'll add an H2. And this one can be a little bit bigger. So we don't need to use that small size class on it. This one is fine being quite a bit larger. So, and actually I just set that on the element. Don't want to do that. I want to use typo white. And let's change this, smooth roast. I don't really know a lot of coffee terminology, so I'm just going to use the word roast a lot and hope that it seems like I know what I'm talking about. Okay, and then this background image on this div under advanced size and spacing, not there, advanced background. We need to set it to cover so that we can actually see the image. And then let's add some text here. And let's set it to white as well. And let's give this heading some space below it. So bottom small. And then drop in some lipsum. We'll use a little bit more here. And then I think I might want to give this div a different background color. So let's go to advanced background and set it to our dark gray. I'm not sold on that. I don't know if I love it. Let's try this one. Nope. There. That's not terrible. Okay, and then let's give it some rounded edges on the corner. So I'm going to select the actual columns element, and we're going to go to advanced borders, set it to 4 pixels. But then we're also going to have to go to advanced layout and set it to overflow hidden, and that'll give us our corners there. Okay, so now I think I want some more space on the left-hand side here. So let's give this some space, advanced size and spacing. Let's give it something like 32 pixels of padding. That does look better. I wonder if we need 64. No, I think 32 is okay. Now that we've built that, we want to kind of do the whole alternating columns thing, which you see on basically every website that's built. So we'll do 3. And this middle one, we'll just flip-flop the text column and image column. And then we'll add some spacing below these as well. So bottom, we'll give it large spacing, I think, on these. So selecting the columns element and doing bottom, large. So that looks pretty good. Let's swap these images out on the other ones. Advanced background, browse, and we'll do this one. And then we'll do another one here, background, browse, and we'll do this picture of our little coffee bar setup. We'll call this fancy cream. And then we'll go down and say rustic charm, I guess. I don't know. Now we'll save that and let's jump up to the front end and take a look at what we have. Pretty solid, basic, homepage so far. We need to adjust our size down and see what happens. And you can see here that everything collapses kind of how we want it to. But because the divs with the images in them are dependent on the height of the content in the adjacent div for their own height, then once they're no longer next to each other, the height collapses, which we don't really want. So what we're going to have to do is set a minimum height on the div with the image. So we can do that on all devices probably without problems. So let's go to advanced size and spacing and set a minimum height of maybe 300 pixels. It depends on really how much content you have here, but you don't want this minimum height to actually impact the height of anything on a desktop device. But if you set that and then go over here and refresh, you can see we now have an image we can actually see. So let's do that to the rest of them. And another thing we need to do, so let's do advanced size and spacing, minimum height 300. Do the same thing here, advanced size and spacing, minimum height 300. And we could do a class for this, but I'm not sure how often we're going to need it, so we're not doing that just yet. Now, another thing we're going to want to do is you'll notice over here that on this middle one, the image is after the text, which we don't want. So instead of that, we're going to actually flip-flop the columns element, which is reverse column order below, say, when are we stacking? 992. So when we stack them, we also want to reverse this particular column. So let's save that, refresh, and we should see now nice responsive columns. So everything is working pretty well. I think we probably want one little call to action thing below this section. So what we'll do is we'll add a section and we'll set the background color to our really dark primary color. And then we'll add an H3. And we'll set the tag to H3, set it to white. And then we'll say, get some coffee today. And then we'll add a button. Now we can kind of steal the card button. So we'll do __ button because we know that that will give us our class in the list here. We can kind of steal the card button and make like an iteration on it. So what we'll do is we'll call this CFE button white. Now we'll copy all the styles from the card button over to the white button class we just made and then delete the card button off of there. Now we can make adjustments to this without impacting our card buttons. So basically all we need to do is make it white, and then the hover color is not going to be good. So we need to make it, I mean, we could use that like slightly off white. That's not going to work because it's like barely visible. So let's just make it slightly transparent when we hover. That works. And then let's grab this section and center everything, and then let's add some spacing below this heading, which is going to be bottom. Let's do medium. And then all we need is a footer. Now I usually just use a section for my footer. If it's really complicated and has like a bunch of stuff going on in it, I'm going to use a columns element usually. But in this case, we're just going to make a really basic footer because footers, in my opinion, are kind of boring and I don't really want to waste a bunch of time on them. I'm just going to make it the same color as our call to action, and then let's just add some text. So let's do a text element, set it to white by using that typography class we set up. And then let's also create a small caps class. So let's do CFE-typo -- small caps. And this is going to be something we can reuse elsewhere for subtitles and things like that. So let's go to advanced typography, letter spacing, 1 pixel, font size 12 maybe. We might go a little bit bigger, maybe 14. And then uppercase, there we go. And then we'll say copyright. And then we want to insert the date. So let's do insert data, PHP function return value, date, and all we're going to pass it is a capital Y. And that's going to give us a dynamic copyright date there. And then let's center everything. Okay, so I think we have successfully built a responsive homepage. So let's go up and just take a look at what we've got on the front end. refresh, we've got our header overlaying our hero with a nice background image and some gradients to kind of smooth the transitions. And as we scroll down, we have this nice card grid using CSS Grid. We have these columns, kind of alternating columns elements, which is a pretty common, design thing. Now, one thing we do need to do is we need to adjust the padding on the center one, because we have some extra padding here on the left, but on this one, we actually need that extra padding to be on the right. Just swap that. There we go. And then as we scroll down, we then get a call to action and a footer. So pretty basic layout, nothing groundbreaking, but it's all fully responsive. And we didn't spend very much time making it responsive. It just kind of worked. A lot of that's because the groundwork we laid in the first video in this series, and a lot of that's just because of the choices we're making to make sure that it's going to play nicely with smaller screen sizes. So I think that's where we're going to wrap up this one. Next time, we'll go in and tackle how we're going to break this thing out into a template structure, and then maybe we'll build one more page on this site just to show some more techniques that can come in handy when building responsive sites. Again, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and thank you very much for watching.